Welcome to class. Academic writing is not just about technical work. It is not only about formatting, structure, or whether the language sounds professional. At a deeper level, academic writing shapes responsibility, trust, and recognition. As we write academically, we are not simply reporting information. We are positioning ourselves within a community of scholars, and we are signaling how our work should be read, trusted, and built up on others. Every paragraph, every citation choices, and every analytical moves contributes to how responsibility is distributed between the author and the existing body of research. In this sense, academic writing are not natural. It actively shapes how contributions can be understood and how credit is assigned. Let's begin with the first story. Lucas is a master's student in business and management program. His research topic is not particularly novel, and it is not trying to break new theoretical ground. However, Lucas was very clear strengths. He is good at organizing information, and he especially skilled at explaining complex ideas in a structured and convincing way. During the writing process, Lucas spent a great deal of time reading the literature. He carefully reviewed different scholars' arguments, compares how various researchers approach similar questions, and reorganize these ideas in ways that make them easier to follow. Over time, he gradually builds what appears to be a very coherent analytical work. Importantly, none of these ideas come out from nowhere. Every argument Lucas uses can be traced back to existing research. These building blocks in his analysis are clearly grounded in previous studies, and his understanding of the field is genuine. However, when Lucas begins to write, something subtle happens. He does not always clearly indicate the sources next to every key ideas. Sometimes this is because he is integrating insights from multiple scholars, and he is not sure which source should be cited at which point. Sometimes it is because he feels that certain ideas has become common knowledge within the field, and sometimes, quite simply, he wants the text to read more smoothly and worry that frequent citations might interrupt the flow. As a result, the overall alignment of theses look clear and mature, but the intellectual origins of the ideas are not always visible to readers. After the thesis is completed, Lucas quickly developed a certain reputation during class presentations and discussions. His classmates feel that his thinking is very clever. His instructors comment that his analysis seemed quite sophisticated and well organized. In discussion, people naturally begin to treat the framework as Lucas' own original contribution. The way the ideas are presented feels integrated and polished, and there are no obvious warning signs. For some time, this does not cause any problems. No one questions him. No one asks him to clarify the sources behind the arguments. Everything appears to be working well. The one day, a researcher in the same fields reads Lucas' thesis and experiences a vague sense of familiarity, not because of identical sentence, but because of obvious copy. But because the way one entire argument unfolds feels very similar to a well-known study the researcher has read before. The study is not obscure. It is part of the established literature. Yet, in Lucas' thesis, It is only mentioned briefly and not clearly identified as core intellectual sources. The researcher does not make any immediate accusation. Instead, he goes back to literature and begins comparing how these ideas were developed across different studies. Slowly, a question began to shape. Lucas did not fabricate any data. He did not copy text directly, but when his analysis is naturally interpreted as his own contribution, even though it rests on intellectual foundation that are not clearly attributed, a serious question arises. How should the readers distinguish between Lucas' own interpretations and ideas that primarily belong to existing researchers? Let's pause the story here. Did Lucas violate specific rules? This is not the question we are answering it right now. At this point, there may be not a clear checklist violation or a simple yes-no answer. But one thing that already become clear, academic writing is not only about clarity, it also shapes who is recognized as a contributor. Where attribution becomes invisible, recognition quietly shifts, and even if no one intended to do. Now, let's move into a next question, next story. Nathan is also a master's student in a business program. His research design is relatively straightforward, and his data collection and analysis are well within his control. Methodologically, his project is solid and manageable. What causes Nathan and most stress is not the research itself, but writing. Nathan feels that he understands his research quite well. He knows why he chose his topic. He knows what his results suggest. However, when he tries to express his idea in academic language, things quickly become difficult. His sentences often sound too conversational. His arguments do not feel sharp enough when he receives feedback from his advisor. He repeatedly sends comments such as, "This paragraph is not academic enough. This argument needs to be clear." Over time, this feedback begins to weigh on him. As Nathan continues writing, he starts paying very close attention to how published papers are written. He observes the authors introduce theories, how they structure arguments, and how they explain complex ideas in just a few sentences. Gradually, Nathan developed a writing habit. He firstly looked how the other had written similar sections, then used similar structures and similar terms to rewrite the content for his own thesis. He does not copy sentences. These relevant sources do appear in the reference list. From the surface perspective, everything looks acceptable. But Nathan really stopped to ask him one important question. If I could not look at this paragraph, how can I explain the same idea in my own words? When the thesis is finished, the writing looks smooth and well organized. Nathan is actually quite satisfied with the final product. On the day of thesis defense, the first part proceeded smoothly. Then, one committee member points to a key paragraph and asks, "In this section, could you see article tradition mainly influenced your use of this concept?" Nathan hesitates. He knows that the paragraph says yes. He remembers why it is included. But as he tries to answer, he realizes that he can only repeat the wordings from the thesis and struggle to explain the idea in different way. The committee members follow up another question. If you do not use this concept, What alternative explanations might you consider? At that moment, Nathan becomes very uncomfortable, not because the question is unfair, but because he suddenly realized that his grasp of this argument is weaker than he expected. This is not an accusation in the room. No one says, "This is not your work." Yet, the responsibility is clearly placed in front of him. The issue no longer whether the writing sounds good, but whether he can stand behind the arguments as the author. Authorship cannot be delegated. Let's pause the story as well. Did Nathan plagiarize? Again, this is not the question we are answering here. There may be not clear rule violations or no obvious misconduct. What emerges instead is a much more difficult issue when researchers rely heavily on established writing patterns, support tools, and increasingly AI-assisted writing. At the point that the authorship responsibility becomes non-transferable, writing support can polish language and improve clarity, but it cannot replace author's responsibility to understand and defend the arguments being made. The two stories we have heard are not classical cases of misconduct. There is no fabrication, there is no deliberate deception. Yet, in both stories, the position of the researcher begins to blur. In Lucas' case, what becomes unclear is the attribution of intellectual contribution. Readers may struggle to see where the existing research ends and where the Lucas' own interpretation begins. In Nathan's cases, what becomes uncertain is whether the author can truly take responsibility for the argument themselves beyond the surface of the quality of the writing. This is precisely why academic writing and citations play such a central role in academic integrity. They are not merely technical requirements, they shape how responsibility and recognition are assigned. The issue, then, is not simply whether a citation is present or whether plagiarism has occurred. Those questions are often too narrow. The deeper question is, when research is read, used, and trusted by others, does the researcher still stand at the center of the work? In the rest of this hour, we will not intermediate draw straight lines, and we will not begin with a list of rules. Instead, we will firstly step back and examine what ethical issues are actually at play in academic writing and citation. We will then explore why, in real research environments, these problems arise so easily. Only after that we will return to the most difficult question at all. Under current academic norms, what are the minimum non-negotiable boundaries that researchers must not cross? The end of this section.